Hi, welcome to another episode of Cybeers. Today we're joined by the wonderful Richard Grainger,
Thank you for having me.
Craig Martin,
Afternoon.
and very special guest, Pete Furst, Head
Nice to
of
be down in
Incident
Melbourne.
Response for Emergence. Welcome to Cybeers.
Finally, good to be on.
Yeah, look, it's been a long time coming. We've talked about it for a little while, and it's great that you get down here to talk about the annual State of Cyber report that we're releasing in July.
I was here for the beer.
You're here for the beer. So, speaking of, we've got something special going on. We've actually brewed our own Pilsner. So it is aptly titled Cyber. So we haven't tested it yet. We haven't tried it. This is actually the first taste test.
Guinea
So
pigs.
let's get into it. Cheers, gents.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Sweet.
It's not bad.
I think we might need to refine the recipe a little bit before we start sending it out, but we'll get through it. So, guys, we're not here just to talk about the beer, which we're definitely going to have to change the recipe of. That's.
I don't mind.
You don't mind it?
I'm usually here drinking a fruity sour, and this is
This is a fruity sour.
Yeah.
Oh, here you go, buddy.
That's a fruity sour. We'll refine the recipe. Anyway, we're not here just to talk about beer. We're here to talk about annual state of cyber and the matters that we work on. Pete, we've worked on over 100 matters with you. Collectively worked on a couple of hundred matters across ransomware, business email, compromise. Craig, Rich, we've worked on so many matters together. What are we saying? What are we going to be looking at in that annual state of cyber report?
Yeah, so we're going to be essentially sort of breaking down the matters we see and then running through what are some takeaways from them. Like, what are some key things? Like, how a threat actor is actually getting in and performing these kinds of attacks. So we'll be running through that. A bit of a breakdown for the incidents that we do with currently a lot of BEC. So I think that's about 44% of the matters that we responded to for the last financial year. Ransomware is 32%, so a lot of ransomware still. And
We're seeing ransomware go up at the moment, aren't we?
yeah, we had a very busy Christmas period with ransomware. I think everyone had a great time with that.
Yep.
How was your Christmas, Pete?
It was cancelled.
Christmas was
The
cancelled.
first one I think we had, well, I know we had a couple come in on the Friday the 22nd,
Yeah.
Yeah.
where everyone was planning a half day.
Yeah.
And then we were working there Christmas Eve. Then the following week, had one come on the 30th. I think something came on the 31st.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit brutal. But then it eased up we actually had 6 weeks without a ransomware, which is kind of unheard of.
But then you were busy with BSAs.
Yeah, there's always other stuff. And then it's come back. They just, Russian threat actors seem to have taken their annual leave a little early this year, but they're back now. So usually June, July is not too bad, but it's looking like it will be.
Yeah, it's looking that way. Craig, from your perspective, what are we seeing in the market at the moment?
Well, I think there's been a bit of a pivot, and we'll probably dig into it a bit more, of this move to find repeatable processes to implement like exploitations to get access into an environment. This time last year, we were talking a lot around critical vulnerability exploitation, even like 2-year-old critical vulnerabilities. Now we're seeing resources and tools are being developed to brute force and collect credentials and steal sessions. And it's really commonplace at the moment. We're seeing those sorts of attacks happening almost every day.
Pete, what about you? Is it the same that you're seeing across the market?
Yeah, very similar. I guess there's a few other things that we're seeing is surprisingly a rise in trusted insider attacks and quite clumsy trusted insider attacks.
Really?
So we've not really had local police involved in too many matters in the last three and a half years, 500 matters. And then we've got like 3 at the moment where local police are likely to arrest people. So I don't know if that's just a reflection of like cost of living pressure and people are getting desperate, or possibly a combination of that and the availability of quite good hacking tools. But, it's not actually that hard to get some of these tools and to deploy them with a little bit of knowledge. So seeing that as well. The other thing that I guess we've really seen is the media attention that comes out of breaches and the severity. We're seeing the government wanting to get involved a lot. And as has been said, sometimes the worst thing that can ever be said to you is we're the government and we're here to help. So we're seeing them. So managing that as a stakeholder has been a new thing, like the new cyber security response coordination unit, just rolls off the tongue, has been reaching out a few times, so making sure that they don't speak publicly, trying to avoid the minister making public comments, because we don't want to draw attention to, obviously, something negative like a breach. But certainly the communications is something that really has to be managed a lot more. Reputational harm is a big risk there. We're seeing just also general scams, I think, because of the amount of data that's been released through things like the Medibank breach, Latitude, Optus. I mean, pretty much you can name and the list goes on. It's helping scammers make their scams more believable. If you've got data on someone's, which bank and branch they bank with, you've managed to get, a statement of theirs, so you can see deposit amounts that have been made. You can add all of these like little facts that you drop in, and they're getting quite brazen. Like they'll just call over the phone and do that. And we're also seeing a lot of people getting socially engineered into giving over MFA tokens as well.
Oh, really?
Even to banking, people just ringing up and saying, hi, I'm from the Commonwealth Bank. We've got some suspicious activity on your account. To check that it is really you, I'm going to send you a MFA code right now. Can you tell me what it is? The person goes, okay.
This is happening in corporate world as well.
Yeah. It happens. Yeah, it happens more often than you'd like, actually.
Really? So this comes down to that socially engineered theft that we talk so often about. And I've talked to many a client to say, when you're going through your insurance renewal, make sure you're ticking the box that specifically says we want coverage for socially engineered theft. Because if they're not taking that, they're just taking the general cyber insurance. Would that kind of thing be covered, or is it then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not authorized to speak on coverage, but
but from your experience,
yeah,
from
socially
what we've all
engineered
seen.
theft is an optional cover with our policy, and I agree with you. You should take it out because it's exploited quite a lot. Like I say, these are now English-speaking threat actors ringing up quite believably, and with that little bit of information, when I'm like, hi, I'm Peter from the Geelong branch of, Bendigo Bank.
ABC,
we saw this transaction last week of 67,000 that looks suspicious. You're going, oh gosh, that does sound real. And it just like, they're getting quite good at convincing people. We're also seeing in the ransomware space, they're also getting more brazen. They're reaching out a lot more. The threat actors are reaching out to individuals. We even have a guy that's been on a few matters now, Andrew, who basically runs a call center for these threat actors. And he will ring up, almost like he's got a script that he follows as though it's any call center. And we'll just ring up and, let the staff know that they've been hacked and all their data's been taken. And if their bosses really cared about them, they'd reach out to the threat actors and start negotiating. And that kind of brazen. What I do like is Andrew always does sound like a call center operator. Kind of like his soul is, slowly dying inside. It's like, this is Andrew. I am calling about the hack. Like, Andrew, it's Pete. Stop it.
But in saying that, Rich, we saw Scattered Spider during the week, and the lead of Scattered Spider allegedly being caught. Which country was he caught
He's
in?
in Spain.
Spain.
Yeah.
And turns out he was English speaking.
Yeah.
What happened there?
I think that's there's kind of been the thought behind Scattered Spider is that they're like Western or like living in Western countries because they're so successful at what they do. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that all unfolds with whether he is a leader. What does that mean for Scattered Spider?
Oh, well, that's the whole point, isn't it? They're scattered.
It's in the name, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a kind of a little bit of a giveaway.
Yeah.
But maybe
I was being slack on the government, but I must say the federal police, that's a different story. They're actually now really starting to work with the other Five Eyes partners and have some success in taking down infrastructure to contribute, in this case with Europol, have that. So, the federal police working particularly, say, internationally with the US, Canada, UK, New Zealand, starting to see some success. Like the Lockbit, obviously, takedown didn't last too long.
they came back bigger and better.
We got some keys out of it for free. So, it's a tangible thing. Like 2 years ago, if you asked me if the police did anything, I'd be like, I have no idea.
We've heard stories in the last 2 months of police walking out of Eastern European countries with bare metal servers, going and doing door knocks on suspected individuals. Like, I think that's probably one of the things that has come out of, the work that the government's been doing is building that cross-border policing capability.
There's also been a lot of media attention about threat actors in particular, and we had this conversation that they're doing that really to say to these threat actors, hey, we are looking, we are watching you, we know who you are, and putting pressure on them, really putting pressure then on the affiliates to say, well, don't work with these people, and trying to make it so they don't want to work with them and they don't want to go and undertake these attacks. Which I don't know if it's working. There's money to be made. They will try and make the money. So,
and like that recent matter we were working on was a $1.8 million US request. It's like
it's not a small amount, is it?
No, if you can make it stick, and I'm kind of sad to say we've had to pay our fair share, or possibly more than our fair share of ransoms, and it does add up. Yeah.
Look, paying ransoms is always that interesting topic, and we're starting to see, I think, less organisations having to pay at the moment because they're realising that backups are important. One of our favourite taglines to come out of Cybeers is always
backups, backups, backups.
Right. Thank you to Jason Trapp
Literally
for that
the three of them though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Literally.
Like it's not even a joke.
No, literally 3 of them. So it's resulting in less payments being made. And when everyone's starting to get alert fatigue or breach fatigue of saying, it's something to the media, it's just another one. People are starting to get to that point. So the communications of coming out and actually saying we've had a breach, we're seeing organisations coming out and actually owning it a lot more often than they were previously, because the general public they really feel sorry for these organisations a lot of the time to say, hey, you've gone through this. There's not the stigma that went with it. 5 years ago, it was absolutely terrible. You had a breach. But then that mindset's shifted. Why?
Well, we're seeing some organisations as well that are actually coming out and doing releasing public postmortems as well. I think it was the British Library, the UK Library. They had an incident towards the end of last year, and they actually released a really detailed PDF, saying this is what initial access was. They got into these servers and access and did all this stuff, and a full sort of breakdown of it. And then that's a really good tool for any other organisation that operates to look at and be like, all right, well, what are we doing about this? How are we, letting people ingress to our network over the internet and stuff like that, and just having it out there to learn from.
Though you will not see my clients
Yeah.
coming out and saying that.
No.
We do though a lot of kind of internal presentations, because there's obviously learnings that you get. So we try and reach out to the brokers in certain industries and kind of go, hey, this is the kind of incidents that we're seeing, and these are the kinds of steps that can be taken. And for all the things we've seen, like the patterns change, but largely the same techniques would have actually solved the problems. Like there's a few things that businesses can do, and if they do, it removes 90% of the risk. Backups is completely one for avoiding the need to pay a ransom. But think about it. If you saw like an RDP port that had to be accessed by a VPN with MFA, no brute force to get rid of that. If you saw patch systems or just legacy systems disconnected, that'd get rid of that. MFA
on the VPN, it's not hard.
Yeah.
If you have a VPN, put MFA on it, please. And don't allow generic accounts to access it.
Yeah.
We're here talking about the stats that are going to be in the manual state of cyber. What are we seeing at the moment in terms of that initial access?
Like of the recent sort of matters that we've worked on, like well over 50% have been brute force VPN. So it's exposed VPN, no MFA. It's just that simple, basically. Much more like we're talking 2-3 times more than critical vulnerabilities that have been exploited, people that have had credentials stolen.
Well, we're avoiding the big elephant that's sitting in the corner at the moment, and that is the OAIC going
I
after.
thought you were having a slag at me.
Going after. Not at all, mate.
Like, fair enough. Come on. You're meant to be a guest here.
You know we love you. But we're the Medibank report,
Yes.
right? And there's a lot of comments in that around how it wasn't really a sophisticated breach. It did come through, allegedly, and it is in the report, MFA not being applied on the VPN for that contractor, and that contractor allegedly using the home PC or the personal machine, storing credentials, and was hit with
Some kind of
form
stealer.
password stealer. Right?
Like, we're all sitting here and we long for the really skilled technical threat actor doing the things we don't even understand and can comprehend.
I think we've done two
Like-
in the over 3 years that the incident response practice has been running. We've done two, and one of those was in the early days, well before Rich, you even joined us, and that was what we believe was a nation state, and that one was super cool. But the rest of them, it's not. They're not going after.
We see
super
the
complex stuff.
same things over and over again.
Even when we try to convince you that it was some really complex.
Doing like 4D chess and like how this thing happened, I'm just like, no, it's going to be like no MFA on the VPN and brute force password spray.
And I think 7 minutes later, we found out it was brute force password spray.
Yeah.
So we're not seeing those super complex things, right? We are seeing these threat actors just going through very basic things. Are you seeing the same thing, Pete?
Yeah, very much. I mean, it's more than a blue moon where you see something that's really quite sophisticated. I know everyone loves to use that word, but I have seen a couple where they were really good at living off the land in their attack. A couple where they're really good at actually getting in and disabling security tooling, but that's rare.
Yeah.
That's rare. People have very bad password security. We have seen a lot as well where people get phished and the same username and password combination that they use for their email is the same that they use to log into their, work MYOB or Zero accounts or into their Facebook or, all these kinds of things. And as you know, you can just get a bot to try 1,000 different sites with a combination in a second, find out where you hit, and then they just exploit that, which can be sometimes just, flooding Facebook ads. Maybe that's all they do. Or, but Zero, it's not uncommon. This is where like our coverage has come up many times where they've got in, they changed the banking details to their own account. Yeah. Then when the next like payroll goes through, just all the pay goes to that one account.
Really?
Mm-hmm. We've seen that several times.
Wow. So those credential stuffing attacks,
yep.
They really come into their own right for those kinds of things, which you don't really consider. You think, oh, what is someone going to get into, like someone gets into Zero? They'll see our P&L. Big whoop. But if they go and change all the employee banking details for salaries, that's where the actual attack comes into its own right.
Yep.
What else are we saying in terms of breaches and access? It can't all just be no MFA on VPNs.
No, it will expose RDP is another big one. So we kind of lump those two together because...
so I shouldn't be exposing RDP to the internet?
Maybe if you change the port from the default one? No,
don't.
No.
Joke.
I use 3390.
Security by obscurity doesn't work. Yeah. You'll find it's not just a ports cancel. It's 3389, right?
Yeah, that's a big one as well. Just exposing RDP. We've seen a couple of credential stealers as well, leading to remote access. But again, you can kind of lump that in again with no MFA on a VPN.
We do still see some zero-day stuff though. Because people can, like you have like a vulnerability in Citrix or something becomes known. You go onto Shodan, search, bingo, start targeting.
Look, the Citrix breach or their 0 day was super interesting. We expected a lot to come from that. I think we did, 3?
Yeah, I think it was 2 or 3 that we had.
3.
And it just disappeared very quickly. Yeah. And we know for a fact through some of our research, there's a lot of web shells on a lot of Citrix servers still out there, still in Australia. We've tried to contact these companies to let them know there is a web shell running on their Citrix box. I think we've reached out to over a couple of hundred organisations and we got 3 responses. So...
Mate, there's still on-prem Exchange servers out there, unpatched. Like every time you're like, what describe your network to us. And go, well, I've got the on-prem Exchange server. It's proxy shell.
So it's
We've got
2024
this.
and we're still seeing proxy shell.
Yep.
Right. These threat actors aren't out there finding, as we say, these absolutely crazy exploits. They're just going back to the ones they've had for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So it blows my mind of how simple these things are. And most of them we go in and we're like, yeah, we know what it is.
Yeah.
A large one we just did. It took us about 24 hours to nail it down and go, yeah, that came through here. They went there. They did that. They exfilled over here. And then that allowed us to contain and then move on to the remediation side of things. And that's the important part is the containment, isn't it?
Yeah.
100%.
100% containment.
Yeah.
What other stats are we looking at there, Craig?
Well, just waiting for Rich to confirm if it's chillin' or keeling.
Chillin' or
No,
Keelan?
it's killing.
I
Killing, it's a mythical beast. It's like
I've been proven right on
Keelan.
camera.
killing. It's like a horse dragon thing.
Yeah.
Like it really is. Like I did not know this. Someone in the office going, "Oh yeah, no, that's that thing from like Chinese mythology."
Yeah.
I'm like, what? And then I did the chat GPT. Can you draw me a picture of a killing? Sure enough, up comes this strangely 3-legged, but nevertheless dragon-like thing with. And would chat GPT lie to us?
No,
I
at
don't
all.
think so.
No.
So you heard it here first. If ChatGPT made it up,
Absolutely.
it's true now, right? If enough people believe it.
Yeah, but so I think killing or chillin',
Killing.
as some of us still prefer to say.
Yeah.
8 Base, Alfie, Medusa Locker, some of the big actor groups that we've seen.
And Lockbit obviously still kicking around like a champ.
Lockbit's also still, never say die. But they're all using these simple exploits to get into environments, and they are all stealing data. All of them.
Yeah.
All of them are exfilling now.
Everybody is exfilling.
Yeah.
Like ransomware, and as we've introduced this with people when we're doing it proactively, like with education, ransomware people think is a virus. Ransomware is an attack.
It's a bug.
It's a it's a bug. Oh, didn't we patch that?
Didn't we patch ransomware?
Didn't we patch ransomware? Yeah, it is actually a series of things that happen, which is compromising your network. They get the keys to the kingdom and then they steal data, which quite often I think probably we see typically stealing unstructured data stored on file servers.
File servers are.
And the one rule of a file server is if somebody can store documents publicly, then they're putting their passport on there. That's rule number 1 usually.
I love that.
There's always a passport.
There's always a passport.
You
Always.
sit there in the first meeting. No, we don't store credit cards and we don't store passports. Pete, how many matters do you find passports and credit cards?
Mate, nearly all of them. Well, I've had everything from like, the guy completely unrelated is using his work account because he, manages the kids' football team, something like that, or the Sunday League football team, and they're doing an end-of-year trip, so he's got all his mates' passports, all the they've emailed him his credit card details so he can book
It's
the
always
flights.
an email, isn't it?
Yeah, emails are a disaster. Or just unstructured data, where a significant law firm and a significant hack in April. That's what happens. People just, you're not thinking about it, right? Like, what's the data that's on people's desktops? What's in their document folder, in their downloads folder? And the threat actor will come in and basically just dump everything. And the problem is, I don't even think that they really exploit it that often. It's such a nightmare for us to go through, unstructured data and try and figure out which individual was affected, what data of theirs was exposed, because these are the things you need to know to tell the Information Commissioner and to tell the individual so they can take proper steps to try and lessen that risk. But for us, it's a nightmare to try and go through and do that. And then also, before we talked about how communications are so important, it is part of trying to explain to people how this process actually does take some time. Because the second people find out, they want to know, well, was I affected? They're like, man, we're going through 1.5 terabytes of data. Maybe. Even the one we were just working on now, it's 131,000 documents. That's...
It's a couple of documents that
it's
we
not a
we have to look
5-minute
at.
job.
No, and the guidance has changed recently from OAIC, hasn't it? it's not necessarily what the threat actor has impacted, it's what they could have had the ability to impact.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have particular opinions on this. So the regulator,
That's what we're here for, is to talk about this.
not to get too much into politics, but the regulator is part of the executive branch of the government. So what they say isn't necessarily true. The legislature is the one that makes the laws, and then the judiciary is meant to be the ones that determines whether the executive is operating properly, as well as other matters. So I think I consider myself as a lawyer. I'm an officer of the court, so part of the judicial branch, and I reckon part of our job is to actually hold the regulators to account when they start overreaching. I think, like, for example, one of the things to come out in the Medibank is they're wanting to view each individual who has been affected as an individual event, which I think if they applied their 2.2 million fine, which I'll get back to in a second, but the 2.2 million fine, if they apply it to all of the people that were potentially affected, I think it turns out to be like a $21 trillion fine that they can
Higher
issue.
than Australia's GDP.
Yeah.
Heck.
Just about 7 times higher, I think.
Just a little bit.
But what's crazy is also in December 2022, the fining limits changed significantly. It's up to 50 mil, and it can actually be higher depending on turnover. So that would make it, like a $500 trillion fine.
Yeah.
And so things like that, you're starting to go, I think you may have given yourself a little more power than the legislature actually intended. And then when you took like the actual words of the Privacy Act, is whether there's been unauthorized access to or disclosure of personal information. And, is it enough to, if you're unsure, like if they just had a possibility that they did access it? Obviously we tend to take a cautious approach because we're wanting to keep the commissioner on side. But I think at some point, people are going to fight back against a heavy-handed regulator. And then secondly, it's the second limit is whether a reasonable person will conclude that it's likely that unauthorized access or disclosure would cause serious harm. A lot of these words, but these words have never been
defined.
Yeah, they're not being litigated. But also, there's a lot of things in that sentence. What's a reasonable person? There are standards for that. But likely, what does likely mean? Like 51%? Like, is it more probable than not?
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, I don't reckon anyone has suffered a breach unless maybe a credit card has been taken. Like is
that going to result in serious harm?
Yeah, potentially. I think credit card with the verification code expiry date, I reckon you can go, I do think that combination is likely to cause harm. Whether it's serious harm because, the bank will reverse the transaction.
Well, not always, right? My wife just had that happen, not just, about 18 months ago. Credit card was compromised, have no idea where from. She was found to be liable for it and had to pay the $8,500 back that someone stole the card, and she could prove it was not her. So it's not happening all the time anymore. The banks are starting to push back.
Yeah, I would challenge that.
Oh, we tried. We tried. And the banks have said, no, you can't prove it. It's completely on you. So we're starting to see that actually happen. And I can speak to that one firsthand. You mentioned something there interesting, is regulators. We do not have many regulated industries from a cybersecurity perspective. We've got APRA, so we've got the authorised deposit-taking institutions, private health and superannuation.
General insurers, yeah.
And we're starting to see SOCI come through,
Yep.
which isn't necessarily regulation. But do we think we're going to see more disclosures once SOCI comes through and really is enforced?
Well, so, as you know, so for those that don't know, Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, SOCI, the government has broadened what that applies to, but it's still certain industries and certain companies that are designated. So these are more nation-state targets. So I'm sure that certain adversaries of ours, you can probably guess they are, I'm sure that they're probably trying to get into all our infrastructure and put backdoors in. They were very successful in getting into the US Department of State using SolarWinds.
Yeah.
I'm sure that they are probably already in and with backdoors. So if a conflict was to kick off, I imagine they'd try and knock out our critical infrastructure. But that's really cyber warfare. And my understanding is that our capabilities in defending this are actually quite good. and even our abilities in perpetrating it are quite good.
Well,
So I don't think SOC is going to come up so much. But what we are going to see is regulators. The government has set the ambitious goal of being a world leader in cybersecurity by 2030.
Yeah.
So you're seeing now the regulators trying to push where they can exercise their power. Whether that's APRA trying to expand its influence. The additional powers are already given to the Information Commissioner, such as information sharing. They can demand answers. They can demand reports. ASIC, you're going to see ASIC starting to go over after directors and things like that. Obviously, also after financial service license holders. So you're going to see more regulatory action. And when the Privacy Act amendment does eventually drop, which rumor is the bill's meant to drop in August, we'll see what extra powers they're given now. So right now, if the Information Commissioner wants to fine someone, they have to go to the federal court to issue the fine, which obviously is quite an effort. So they're just trying to take down, like Australian Clinical Labs. They're investigating some others as well at the moment. Obviously, Medicare, Medibank. My apologies. My apologies to the government.
we're not freaking anyone out.
Yeah. But if they're looking at adding kind of other tiers, so like a low and a mid tier, where they might be able to issue fines directly. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out.
How would that play out? So they could just go to the company directly and say, you're fined. It doesn't have to go through the court system.
Yeah, so I think that would be, yes, it'd have to be obviously a much smaller fine. But that's the plan.
Would they have to prove, though, the same levels, the reasonable person, serious harm, and repeated and serious breach?
What's interesting is, so like with Australian Clinical Labs, one of the key things that they're pleading there is that Australian Clinical Labs breached Australian Privacy Principle 11.1, which 11.1 is about having basically secure information technology systems. By breaching, they're kind of saying because you were breached, it actually proves that you didn't have adequate systems. And then the second thing they're going to start going after is 11.2, which basically is the data you hold. If you no longer need to hold it, you should either delete it or anonymize it. And that's kind of it's a good way for the commissioner to argue, because rather than trying to get down to this thing about, was it serious harm? Was it all this? You go, no. Why if you had data that's 30 years old, which comes up all the time, that's just a slam dunk, right? You're just going, you had no legal purpose for holding this for 30 years. That's just a breach. What's interesting, they're also arguing with Australian Clinical Labs is that, say you did hold it for 30 years and you should have only held it for 7. That means actually for 23 years, you were in breach of your obligations, and therefore you could be fined for each of those 23 years. And obviously, Australian privacy principles don't go back that far, but you're kind of getting the point I'm coming to, is that they really have a lot more teeth than I think people realise. And if they start offering lower tiers, like even imagine if it was just a $1,000 fine you could do, but then they're saying, okay, well, there was 1,000 people affected, $1,000 fine, that's $1 million. If my maths does me right.
Yeah, look, and we're seeing that a lot, aren't we, during incidents that we work on, and that's such brilliant information to share with people that are watching. This is why we love having guests on.
Yeah, I'd be freaked out if I was
things like this, right?
If I was a director of a company in particular, I'd be asking questions like, what data do we hold? Why are we holding it? Yeah. Do we have to make it online accessible? Like, you do have a legal obligation to hold data quite often, but can't it be held in it's storage that's isolated, segregated?
Yeah.
How are we protecting it?
Yeah, I don't even mind if you put it on a hard drive. You've got a couple of hard drives and you just unplug them and put them in the safe. That's fine. Anything other than, I'm always staggered the amount of times you've seen 30-year-old data.
Yeah.
And then you try and notify these people and oh, hi, Nick, guess what? We've got your tax file number from when you worked with us when you were a 17-year-old. And you're like, that was 30 years ago. Why?
Hey, I'm not that old.
No.
you were saying I was roasting you.
But as you know, tax file numbers don't change. So that is a perfect example where someone who was working, say in the sports club or something 10 years ago, is quite rightly going, why is this happening? They put in a complaint to the commissioner. It's a slam dunk.
We're seeing that during the matters we're working on, right? Data governance comes up all the time.
Yeah.
You're always finding data, and we're flabbergasted by the amount of times we find data that we look and go, why haven't you just shifted this? And they say, oh, we haven't really thought about it.
Yeah.
So our advisory team is starting to work on a lot of these data governance reviews. What data have you got? Why have you got it? Shift it out, encrypt it, as Pete says, put it on a hard drive somewhere. We're seeing that consistently. Do you think we'll start seeing that reduce in the matters that we're working on?
I think it'll be a slow thing. Like,
Am I just too hopeful? Things work quickly.
Yeah, I don't, and I think we're just going to continue to see it.
Like, we're still at the point where there's a fair chance if that organisation was hit by a business email compromise, that threat actor's been in there for the last 30 years as well. Like, we've got some stats on dwell time for business email compromise. So average is 33 days is how long it takes an organisation to figure out that they've been hit.
33
On
days.
Average.
On average.
Yeah.
So explain what that means. So threat actor gets access
Yeah.
through some form or another.
Phishing usually.
Phishing, always phishing. And MFA bypass, which we have our white paper about, which will be referenced in the annual state of cyber as well. So then it takes the organisation 33 days to identify they've been compromised from a business email compromise.
And most of the time they're only finding out because someone's like chasing up an invoice or
So it's because
phishing's
of
going
payment
out.
redirection.
Yeah, payment redirection. Yeah.
Or threat actors now completed what they're looking to do or were unable to perform payment redirection. And now they're like just spraying out more phishing emails to get into more mailboxes and just repeat the cycle again.
And that's average. So Microsoft recently increased some of their audit log retention periods. So it went up from 90 days to 180 days.
Do you have to turn that on?
So historically, for old Microsoft 365 tenancies, it was disabled by default. Any new tenancy is enabled by default.
Okay. People that are watching this, how do they go and check if it's turned on?
We might have to put a link into the description, but it's...
So you actually have to turn on
It's under
logging.
So it's unified audit log, and if you just spin up a tenancy today, brand new one, it'll be on.
Okay.
It's if you got an older one.
How old are we talking? Like 2 years, 3 years?
I think it's been like over 3. Yeah, I'd say like anything over 3 years, and it hasn't been turned on. Probably worth doing. It's under the compliance setting. We'll have a link on how to check it. But make
so
sure
if you've
it's
got an M365 tenancy that's over 3 years old, turn on universal audit logging.
Yes.
And you're saying that
Please.
retention period is now going up.
Yeah, it's going up. It's needed, to be fair, because we're just seeing those 12 times increase. It's capturing some really good info now, which is because there has been so many of these attacks. People have been going to Microsoft saying your logs don't hold enough information. So understanding more around what's been accessed and how many of those club passports have been accessed.
And why it matters, like before you were talking about how the commissioner, is kind of looking at it a bit differently, how they consider it. Because the actual words just mean, if there's unauthorized access to. If someone has been in there for 33 days, our argument gets harder to basically go, hey, they didn't download the mailbox. We can't tell. But if they're going, well, they've been in there for 33 days. If there is some good logging, we can kind of go, actually, we can see every email where they've gone in, where they've clicked the attachment. We've gone through all of those. We found that attachment is it's a B2B invoice. Fine. Like that gives you a good story to tell the commissioner. We went through, looked at all those. There's no PII. But without logging and with knowing that the dwell time is that long, there's a lot of times, or if they're using things like perfect data, which is one of the things we've seen, particularly over the last few months, which is a client that helps you download, basically sync the mailbox. A lot of threat actors are getting in and using that.
And that's not logged, is it?
You can see the sign-ins of it occurring.
You can see it's there. You don't see what it does.
Which is a real problem. But
So-
you know what it can do.
Yeah. So you have to assume that the threat actor has synced the full mailbox.
Yeah.
Then we got one now. It's a health clinic. An admin person still had this like 185-page document on all their health conditions and all that. And you're like, why is this in the admin's mailbox? And obviously we have to go through the process of, notifying.
Yeah.
Which is not good.
No. And we see that a lot in health providers. And
Yeah, so
Yeah, healthcare and
I love
finance
emailing.
industries are the highest number of incidents we deal with, like by sector. I think it's like 18% each in terms of like breakdown of the incidents. So healthcare, see it a lot, and obviously it's very sensitive information that can be on those systems as well.
And that partly reflects what we pass on as well. Like if I have a plumber who only does business accounts, and his mailbox has been done, you kind of go, look, what type of data do you actually ever hold? Like, you do some searches of your own in the mailbox. Let me know if you find anything. And at that point, we're like, okay, we can just dismiss this, change password, look for mail forwarding rules, make sure MFA is enforced, learn from the experience. But even then, you'd be surprised, like I mentioned before, it'll be the plumber actually, though, did, organise for the mate's holiday away and has all of their passports.
Yeah.
So it's 33 days dwell time for business email compromise. What about average ransomware at the moment? What's the dwell time that we're seeing on that? Is it long periods they'll get in and they'll traverse the network and find out about everything, or is it smash and grab?
I think I'll need to confirm. I think it was in the sort of 15 days or so we're seeing on average for the last financial year. We've seen some instances where the threat actor has been in there for weeks, slowly exfiltrating data, being very quiet about it. But others where they literally get in and that day is that's it. They'll exfiltrate the data, disable tooling, and
That
deploy the
day's
ransomware.
doomsday.
Yeah.
Remember we had that great one with the threat actor had even throttled
I was just thinking about that.
the download speed, so it's extra trading, so it wouldn't interrupt during business hours. The internet would still run quickly, so just trickle during the day, then on the weekends go boom, and then trickle during the day and boom. It's pretty
Pete,
good.
most of your phone calls still coming in Friday afternoons, the Friday
Regrettably.
afternoon specials.
Yeah, so it's that, or people find it up first thing in the Monday morning when they get in. But what quite often will happen as well is that people think that cybersecurity is a IT issue. So they'll give it to their MSP, who quite often is maybe contributing to the vulnerability. The MSP will try and figure it out, and then come Friday, we'll be like, we can't figure this out.
Yeah, they always give themselves till Friday.
Yeah.
Or-
And then they call us.
Or they've restored from backups and overwritten all the evidence and then call you.
Yeah.
Well, then they call me a month later because they've just been named on a leak site.
Yeah.
I'm like, fine, okay. Well, what did you do? Did you keep a copy of did you image the server before you wiped it? I'm like, no.
No.
Guess what? We now have to notify everyone or download all of the data off the leak site, which is actually harder than people think.
Oh, yeah.
Very long, slow
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. That's why when everyone freaks out about data breaches, I'm like, so we have one now with Medusa Locker. It's actually, you can't even go to the leak site and just download it. You can kind of go, then I think they add you to a Telegraph group, and then in Telegraph, they get a link, and it's not the kind of thing that an amateur's doing.
Yeah.
Is going to be able to access.
The average person down the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Friday afternoons, 15 days for ransomware. Someone's been in your network for 15 days. They're exfiltrating data, and then they get the data, and then they launch the ransomware, and that's when you find out.
Yeah.
So
And then about 10 to 15% of the time, we have to get negotiators in there, go sort it out and pay the money.
Yeah.
which is not a fun process to go through.
No.
Team, we've been talking already for quite a while. We've got a couple of minutes left, and we could talk about this for hours. I think we said that on the way here, that we might need to do this in a 3-part mini-series. But Pete, what we like to do now is wrap up with wise words. Any wise words for the viewers that you'd like to pass on?
I guess my soapbox at the moment is do not think of cyber as an IT issue. Like a lot of we talked about things like data and what you're doing with it. This comes down to really governance. Your educational thing, that comes down to governance, making sure your board is meeting their obligations, their duty of care and diligence. That requires that they stay up to speed with the threats that face their business. That's a requirement of it. So if they're not up to date, so that's just the governance side of the thing. You do want to take all the steps to make your IT as up to scratch, like things we talked about, patching systems, having offline backups, making sure that you've got MFA enforced, and not just on your emails, on your VPNs. Don't have exposed access to things like RDP. Having preparedness as well. So having an incident response plan, having a business continuity plan. A lot of people, that's the first thing that, it hits the fan when there's an incident, but then they don't even know who's in charge when it happens. They don't even know, like they give it to the MSP who spends a week trying to faff around, and we may only have 7-day logs on some things. You get that quite often, like a firewall log may just, overwrite. And depending on what the settings are set to, that sometimes is even like a 24-hour overwrite. So if you wait a week to call us, it's a real problem. So I think it's just having the understanding that a proper incident response is much larger than an IT issue. So I think the sooner you can reach out to experts, and you might have a great MSP, like, fine. That's still a different skill than digital forensics, a different skill than legal speciality. It's a different skill than communications, which is really important on bigger matters. So if you don't have that full picture, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. But if you do the right thing, like that major matter that we worked on recently that hardly anyone heard about, which is great, within half an hour, I think in that one actually was more like within 8 minutes, because I was already on the phone with you guys, and I was like, stay on the phone. We're going to have a meeting in like 8 minutes.
Yep.
So we had legals, we had forensics, we had crisis communications, all there. And that's
They followed the process to a T.
it's absolutely what you want. Because I'm like,
Pick up the phone, call the insurance provider, number one. Call your cyber insurance provider.
because it's like, they're excellent at what they do. But I tell you what I can do, within 15 minutes, I can have 20 experts on the call who are all experts at what we do, which is solving cyber problems effectively and efficiently. And you want that, right?
Yep, I love that. That's my key piece of advice, and it always has been, always will be. Your incident response plan could be
Call me.
pick up the phone, call your cyber insurer. If that's your incident response plan, that's okay. But have that phone number, know who it is. It could be your broker, it could be the carrier directly, but just make that phone call.
We had
Don't wait.
a session. I'm pretty sure I'm taking up more than a couple of minutes. We had a session with a large government body, and it was to go over their incident response plan, and they showed us their draft, and I think it was 48 pages long. And I'm like, this is utterly useless. Like, in an incident where people are freaking, no one's pulling out a 48-page. And I'm like, what you need, and I appreciate they want to have all their escalations and all this. Like, even if you are going to have that, you need to add a new front page. The new front page says who to escalate to when you discover something, who's in charge for your organization in responding. Here's my phone number. Here's your policy number.
Yep.
That's your one page. Print it out. Put it next to the photocopier. Put it next to the water bubbler. That's it.
100% agree. Could not agree more. Craig, wise words of wisdom for this episode of Cybeers.
There's not enough exclamation marks you can put at the end of a password to make it secure. That's it.
But I also use a question mark.
Valid point.
That's
P at 55W0RD doesn't count. Rich, any wise words of wisdom?
I think, I'm not sure if I've done this one before, but it's fairly topical because I'm seeing it happen all the time, which is hypervisors being accessed by ransomware groups and then resulting in full disk encryption of virtual servers running on them. So it's just making sure that you're segregating your hypervisors. You can't access them from like some random spot in your network, and making sure that you got logging on those devices as well, particularly with things like ESXi, which
Because the threat actors do encrypt at the VMDK level.
we do see.
They don't just encrypt
it's a
at
nightmare.
the file system level.
And that makes life very difficult when you're trying to do forensics on a disk that you can't actually interrogate.
Well, it makes it near on impossible, right? When
Yeah.
You have to rely on firewall logs.
Yeah.
Which comes back to Pete's point. If you if you're overriding your firewall logs every 24 hours, it makes it really hard.
Then you end up with just some ISP logs showing that 60 gigs was taken. You're going, excellent. It's a 4 terabyte file server.
Yep.
Yeah,
Like-
which 60 gigs was it?
Exactly.
So yeah, just protect your hypervisors.
Yep. Love it.
The last thing we didn't mention, is principle of least privilege and applying not only to users, but actually applying to systems. It's one of the things we've seen, like, why does this system need to communicate with that system? No, well, why can't it?
Network segmentation.
Very much. And also, I do think you do see the classics where, like, oh, we've all got domain admin because it makes it easier when someone needs to use the printer. And you're like, what do you mean? I remember one of our early matters, the guy had like the file server and the domain controller were the same server.
Yeah.
And you're like going, what? Like,
Move it to SharePoint.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
just insane. So yeah, principle of least privilege for applications, for network hardware, for individuals.
Love it, and a very wise piece of advice to finish on. So, team, as I say, I think we're going to have to come back and do a part 2. But Pete, thank you for coming on Cybeers.
You're welcome.
Sharing your wisdoms.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Cheers.
Can you pass me the gin?